I'm George Galloway, and I present Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing Brazil. Brazil is the giant of Latin America. 200 million people of a population, one of the world's mightiest economies, until recently thrusting forward, forming a part of the BRICS organization. Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, with Iran coming on stream. It looked like a kind of alternative economic and political model. But something drastic has changed. After decades of dictatorship or covert dictatorship, with a wealthy oligarchy effectively operating with the army standing just behind them, Brazil finally became a democracy, and the Workers' Party in Brazil proved that they could win elections on a left-of-center program. Their legendary leader, Lula, Luis da Silva, the Workers' Party leader, Dilma Rousseff, won the presidency after the retirement of Lula, the great and legendary trade union leader. She won a very narrow majority for a presidential term which has now been brutally ended with what I would call a coup. A coup under the cloak of parliamentary maneuvers and legal rubber stamping, that's true. Not a coup in the old style, with the army seizing power with their tanks on the street, but a coup nonetheless. A coup against the tens of millions of people who voted for Dilma as president. Without a vote being cast, she has been replaced by her persecutor-in-chief, himself Temer, banned from standing for public office because of campaign finance violations. He's a creature of an oligarchy that grew into multi-millionaire status by personal corruption. The Workers' Party is accused of corruption, though little of it is either proved or personal. Dilma's crime appears to be that she manipulated government figures to show the economy in a better light than it actually was. If that were held against all the governments of the world, there'd hardly be one of them in power. It's true that the Parliament, the Senate, rubber-stamped this impeachment, and it's true that Dilma is out. The question we'll be discussing tonight is what that means for democracy in Brazil. Is it the end of democracy in Brazil? Are the army and the oligarchy back in power for the duration? Or will, with his Temer's tiny sliver of support in public opinion, is currently running at around 14% approval, is he vulnerable to a mass movement on the streets of this great and giant country? What will be the impact on the foreign policy of Brazil? Will Brazil cease to be one of the BRICS and try to be just another brick in the wall of capitalist, globalized orthodoxy? What's going to happen to the poor and the indigenous people of Brazil? Brazil is a very heterogeneous country with huge numbers of indigenous people, black people, Arabs. There are more than 10 million Arabs in Brazil, more than 20 million Arabs in Latin America as a whole. Some are on the left, some are on the right, but the wealthiest ones are almost always on the right. And in the case of Brazil, it would be interesting to tease out here tonight what role that 10 million plus, maybe 11 or 12 million Arabs in Brazil have played in these events. As always, I'm joined by an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. So I'm going to hand over to the first of those experts to comment on the situation now in Brazil. Yes, sir, welcome.
Thank you very much, George. My name is Victor Fraga. I'm Brazilian myself. I have been in the UK for about 18 years. We write about film and I'm an activist as well. I've been deeply involved in the latest developments demonstrating against the beyond reactionary events in Brazil. As you pointed out, the impeachment is just a mere cloak. This is a coup d'etat. This is a deeply reactionary coup d'etat. So it's a jolly alliance of the moderate right wing with the very reactionary evangelicals. The worst of the worst.
Evangelical Christians.
Evangelical.
How many of
Christians.
those are there in Brazil?
Oh, I don't have the exact figures, but they are spreading like wildfire. About 20 years ago, 90% of Brazil was Catholic. Now it's down to 70%, and the Catholic Church is very quiet, has remained very quiet. And the Catholic Church opposed the coup this time. In '64, when we had another coup, a military coup, the Catholic Church gave their enthusiastic support. The evangelical churches are a bit more ambiguous, but overall, it's safe to say that they have supported these illegitimate process, which is described as an impeachment, but which is a coup d'etat with the purpose of, as you pointed out, dismantling the BRICS. It's an anti-hegemonic process. So get Brazil out of the BRICS, get Brazil back in the IMF. Ironically, just yesterday I was reading in the news that the IMF was welcoming Macri and Argentina back, because Argentina once again is lending money from the IMF. Lula and Dilma paid off the IMF. So, but now we're probably going to see Brazil moving backwards, and instead of creating a bank and the BRICS, going back towards the IMF dependence on the IMF and aligned with the interests of the US. Rest assured that the US is very enthusiastic about this coup. We think of Obama as happy, fluffy, yet he has tacitly supported this coup. There's plenty of evidence of that. Liliana Ayauda, the American ambassador in Brazil during the coup, is the same one that was in Honduras and in Paraguay when there was a coup d'etat. There's evidence that the judge, which has been persecuting Lula without any evidence, Moro, has been trained by the CIA. The day after the vote in the lower house of parliament in the Congress, Aloysio Nunes, one of the most senior members of the then opposition, now illegitimate government, he went to meet with Thomas Shannon, who is the most senior person in the US in Latin American affairs and who reports directly to Obama. So there's absolutely no doubt that the US are involved as deeply as you can imagine in this coup. And this is not in the interest of the working people. It's not in the interest of Brazilian people. They're removing workers' rights. While this coup is not as violent and oppressive as the one from '64, from a social perspective, the effects could be far more devastating. They are dismantling all the workers' rights which were created by President Getúlio Vargas in the 40s and 50s, something the dictatorship didn't do. They're removing a fund for the literate. They are wreaking havoc in the country. They want to dismantle the health system. They want to abolish free higher education. They've been talking about people working 80 hours a week and retiring at the age of 70. So the consequences are horrific. This realignment towards away from the BRICS, towards the US, this flawed Milton Friedman neoliberal argument mutated into some grotesque 21st century beast is coming to bite our heads off.
And of course it's accompanied by wholesale privatization of public assets. Oil and gas rights, motorways, infrastructure. As you've said already, the education system will be opened. It sounds like a bit of a bonanza for the rich, and therefore what are the poor saying about it or doing about it?
Well, right now, the poor, 30 million people were lifted out of poverty. under Lula and Dilma. That is a huge accomplishment. Brazil was removed from the hunger map of the United Nations. So the poor people are standing with Lula. I come from the northeast of Brazil, which is the poorest region of the country, and where Lula and the Workers' Party has the strongest support, because he has given people, he has put plates on people's, he has put on people's tables and food on their plates. So they are supporting Lula and Dilma. The elites, they can't stand seeing these people. I have literally heard someone say to me, I used to be, under Fernando Henrique Cardoso, I used to be able to have 4 maids. Now 2 of them are gone to university. I can only have 2. So this is very much representative of why these people feel their privileges that they've held since the colonial times. These elites have been threatened by equality, by the Workers' Party. So the poor people right now aren't, they don't have the engagement tools. There's still a lot of poor people in Brazil, and you can't solve a country's problems in 13 years. The Workers' Party was in power for 13 years. So you are not going to see a revolution where all the poor people are going to come out of the favelas and invade Brasilia. That's not going to happen. They would vote for Lula in 2018. That's the hope of everyone. But now they're doing their uttermost to put Lula in jail on trumped-up charges without any evidence at all. The Brazilian Congress, the Senate have become a kangaroo court with the support of the Supreme Tribunal, which have traded their silence for a pay rise of 41%. The day after Dilma was impeached, they received a pay rise of 41%. So they've kept silent, and they've got this judge, which is doing everything the opposite,
in their
right-wing ones.
Who would like? Yes, gentleman behind you.
I'd just like to add that the poor people are not really aware about this coup d'etat because the media played a very important role in it. Dilma wasn't judged by any corruption. She doesn't have any, there were no allegations whatsoever against her. But the way the news were presented, especially on TV Globo, is like they present 2 cases of corruption, and then they put the impeachment in between, and then a following case, corruption as well. So for the viewers, it was all associated, but they don't even know what a coup d'etat is. They didn't take part in it. And the people who went to the streets before the impeachment were all middle class. And the demonstrations always took place in very posh areas, both in São Paulo and Rio and other cities. And the media always hated the Workers' Party for some reason. It's hard to understand why, because the Workers' Party didn't cut any advertising from them or any, they tried to appease them.
The clue's in the name, Workers' Party. The oligarchy are going to hate a party called the Workers' Party, even if it disappointed the workers from time to time, which it did.
And there was also enough evidence that Dilma was an obstruction to the investigations, which would sooner or later catch these politicians who impeached her.
Who are in
there
fact
was a
corrupt.
senator called Romero Jucá, whose conversation was recorded without his knowledge, and the plot was so explicit. They were talking about, with her, this won't stop, this wash car investigation. It's called wash car, about Petrobras, our state oil company. And after that, you would have thought that people would change their views, but the media didn't give it enough coverage. It wasn't on the front page of any newspaper. It was always, at the bottom of a page, on page 6 or 7 or somewhere. But it's evident that they needed to get rid of her in order to be protected against this investigation. And also, another assault on democracy is that the president, who was the vice president, he was elected with Dilma, but the program was totally opposite. He's doing totally the opposite. This wasn't the government program that Brazilians elected. And in a democracy, this is an absurd, because he's privatizing everything. He's freezing investments in health and education for 20 years. He wants people to work more. The only hope we have is that he's very sort of a coward. If there is a strong reaction, sometimes he holds back, as he did with the Minister of Culture, for example, who he tried to abolish, and there was occupation, artists occupied the premises, and now we have a bad one, but it shows that we have some strength if you unite and try to fight it. But the other serious thing as well is the justice system. This week, the public ministry, which was like the Crown Prosecution Service, called the media to give a press conference calling Lula the leader of the corruption gang. And he did a very terrible PowerPoint presentation, but 95% of the allegations weren't based on any facts. And when the case was now with this judge, Sergio Moro, there is only two things that Lula is being investigated about. But all the propaganda, because they're really scared that Lula is a candidate in 2018, because if he runs, I think he will win the election, because people will remember his 8 years in office, how their lives improved. He made terrible alliances. I think there were serious errors of judgment. We don't know if he benefited from this or not, and that shouldn't be used to stop him from being a candidate, but it has been, and the coverage this propaganda gets is amazing in the media. So without him, I think it would be very hard for any left-wing party to win the election, because they don't have anyone with that charisma, with that ability to communicate, to talk the people's language, which was a problem with Dilma, because she wasn't a good speaker.
I agree with that. Yes, madam?
Good evening. My name is Amina. I'm from Nicaragua, and I'm a human rights defender who doesn't like frontiers, who doesn't like borders. I have been listening to Brazilian people who are living in Brazil, different opinions about Dilma, and I have written some of them, some of their opinions. I have brought them here to you. Some say that Dilma was an efficient manager, not a politician. Some saying that the media, as someone else have said here, has made the problems an exaggeration. And because of the power of the media, Dilma has been gone through the impeachment. Most of the population, or some of the population, accuse her of corruption with Petrobras, and the list goes on. The list of corruption that has been committed under her administration. My worry as a human rights defender is with the indigenous people. Okay, whoever is in power needs to make sure that the indigenous people are protected.
The new cabinet in Brazil is all white, yeah?
I have heard that.
No, I can show you the picture.
I've heard that.
Yes, all men and all white. So you should be right against them.
I'm absolutely against that, because I think that we must protect our people, you know, the people that originally was in our countries before the Spaniards came, or before the British went, or before the Portuguese came to all these countries. And I think it's very important, because I heard as well that Dilma has made comments against the indigenous people, tried to humiliate them. I don't know how true this is, but he has said that he has to show them the way how to eat and the way how to use the water resources and so on.
Doesn't sound likely to me. Doesn't have the ring of truth.
Okay, I heard as well that the indigenous...
Where did you hear it? On the street?
I heard it from Brazilian people. From some of the Brazilian people.
Come from the internet, because actually the media didn't leave it out if it had happened. They wouldn't ignore it. I can tell you.
Yes, I mean it's a subject to discuss. You know, as an outsider, I'm not Brazilian. I'm Nicaraguan. I want to know.
No, your point of view is entirely welcome.
Because we have indigenous population in each of our Latin American countries.
But
I have heard as well that the indigenous people were against to a dam being constructed because of the environmental repercussions that it will have. And it's the same in Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, the government wants to allow the Chinese to come and construct the interoceanic canal, which actually they have started displacing the indigenous people from their own land. And this is going to cause a lot of environmental trouble. So all of these things, I don't want them to happen. So if the cabinet in Brazil is all white and there is not even one woman in power, I think there is something wrong. And I think that we must fight against this. And this is my case. And I want to hear the opinions and I want clarifications of how things are.
Well, there we go. There's another charge added to the indictment that Dilma tried to say that indigenous people had to be taught how to eat. It just goes to show that the power of propaganda is enormous, which is why any political force that wishes to transform its society has to get its hands on the levers of propaganda. Because I'm going to ask Isaac in the next segment, who's a pan-Latin American activist. This is part of the same story, the slander of the leftist political leaders and the failure of those leftist political leaders to have developed a counter-media ability, and thus are sitting ducks when the oligarchy seeks to strike back. Much more where this came from after this. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing Brazil, in particular the coup which has overthrown the elected president of Brazil. What will that mean for Brazil, for Latin America, and indeed for the world? Before we continue the studio discussion, let me tell you that we earlier took the Kalima Horra camera onto the streets of London to ask people what was the meaning of the overthrow of the president of Brazil. Was it the end for democracy in Brazil? Let's see what they said.
Do you think the removal of President Rousseff ended the democratic process in Brazil?
I don't think that it ended it, but I think it's definitely a challenge to it, because now you have these popular fronts on both sides for or against the removal.
The people are the ones that put the president in the power, so if they are not happy with that, I think they should be allowed to take them off the power as well.
Yes, but I believe nowadays we in the best way, a new way, and I believe it's very good to Brazil and Brazilian.
Probably did, because now we may have the military taking over the country, which is a thing that it happened in the 50s, and I don't think it's going to be good for Brazil or for the Brazilian people.
Is Rousseff's impeachment a democratic move or a silent coup?
I think it was a silent coup. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I believe it's a democratic move. Yeah.
No, it's a democratic move. If you analyze it on maybe July or June, many people were to the street to ask to democracy to change our country.
They seem to have followed the proper procedures, so I guess in this case it was a democratic move.
Well, a mixed bag of reactions. Let's go back to the audience. Madam.
My name is Ali Rasha. I'm a film producer and also a human rights activist. I was going to pick up from the point that Amina was making about indigenous peoples, because actually Dilma and Lula, they didn't do as much as was expected for indigenous peoples while they were in power, but that was probably due to the alliances they made, these evil alliances they made, that they had to always get approval from what we have the most conservative Congress in the democratic period. We have what they call the BBB lobby, which is the bullet, the beef, and the Bible. So it's the agricultural lobby, the security forces lobby, and the evangelical lobby. So since just before Dilma got impeached, she actually demarcated lots of Indian land. But then as soon as she was removed from power, Temer kind of stopped, interrupted those demarcations from going forward. So there's been a lot of criticism from the social movements, from lots of different movements in Brazil, and left-wing movements. But as soon as they realized that what would come with the removal of Dilma would be much worse, all these people united to also fight for democracy, because this is not a democratic process. The way that she was removed, the reasons that she was removed for are not democratic reasons. They, like Vicente said before, it was all coordinated between the elites and the mainstream media, who has a history of distorting the reality to benefit, the entrepreneurial, the elites, and the political and the entrepreneurial people. So what we're having now, we've got the left uniting to fight for. We've got this rising protests happening now. The media is hardly giving any coverage to that, but I'm pretty sure that we will see these movements get stronger and rising. I mean, Temer's got 14% approval. He's a totally unpopular, illegitimate government, and the agenda is just pushing towards a neoliberal agenda, and that's not what people voted for. So he's got, like Victor said as well, he's got a completely different government program than what Dilma had, and people are not going to accept that.
And presumably the indigenous people and other minority populations, I say presumably, I mean they'd have to be blind not to notice that the cabinet is entirely male and entirely white.
Oh yes, that has been discussed, that has been noted as soon as he appointed.
So he didn't even try, did he? He didn't even,
no, recently I think the fourth minister that he had appointed has been removed, and now he has placed a woman in his place, and that was also seen as a move to say, oh, I'm actually now putting a woman in the government.
A white woman?
A white woman, yes.
Let's hear from this lady here, and then we'll go to Isaac.
My name is Carolina Matos. I'm a lecturer at City University and also former journalist. And to move on, actually, to pick up from the point about the women's representation in Brazilian politics. So that is something that is quite crucial to this story as well, because one of the aspects of the impeachment campaign was the chauvinistic and sexist attack that Dilma suffered. And here we're talking about a country that has problems with domestic violence against women. So we have basically a country where chauvinism is deeply ingrained. And this is why when we see what we have today, and just picking up what someone said about it being a center-right government, we have to understand that the situation there is not of a center-right government as we would have Angela Merkel in Germany, for instance. This goes much more to a kind of extreme form of right-wing in the sense of this nostalgia towards the past, woman's place in the home, no representation of blacks, repression. So we have also a growing censorship, a repression. So this is why I think what we need to point out, and I've done this with interviews and I've talked to many people, Obama or other leaders would not actually support that type of policy in their own country. So we're not dealing with a traditional center-right. That's the first thing. We're dealing in a situation where we can go back, they pointed out, you also mentioned, to a situation of soft dictatorship, a kind of authoritarianism. This has been growing in the last years, right? So there's a lot of attacks against students who go to protest. There's a lot of the media, another important thing. We've worked and we've written about the media, which was going in a very more professional basis in the 90s. What we see in the last years is the media, Glenn Greenwood has talked about it, the media in Brazil turning suddenly like a big Fox News, right? So we have a situation, and even reverse of Chavismo, if you want, in Brazil, of a kind of extreme conservative mindset that is going throughout the whole country, and that's quite frightening. Where is that going to lead us? So we need to ask those questions. What's going to happen now? How can we? You talked about propaganda. That's an important point. This is all about discourse, because what happens is that some people from the middle classes think that the Dilma government, which is very mild, some people even called it center-right because it did not do many of the things that people expected, but some people thought it was a Cuba government. Right, so this is very much about discourse, about people's understanding.
If it was a Cuba government, it would still be there.
It was a very mild government, right? And Brazil is not Europe. Brazil needs to deal with the welfare state, needs to deal with issues that actually other countries have already dealt with. So we're fragile democracy, we're very far behind, and that discourse needs to be put forward, because soon even the middle classes who lost their support that some of them gave to the Workers' Party, because obviously there was a bit of support from them, if they realize how serious this is, as they will soon, they also are not going to like it. Right, so we're going to have a situation where people now are discussing, will there be a civil war? Will there be more clashes in the streets? You know,
is that a possibility, do you think?
That is a real possibility. That's a real possibility. Right, so it's very uncertain. If before we had a weak government, you know, with Dilma, with some of the problems, but at least we knew that in 2018 we could vote for someone. But now suddenly everything is uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know if Temer is going to be impeached and the Tucanos are going to take power. We don't know if there will be a civil war, because everything is pushing to the utmost limit. So it's a frightening moment. So we need to ask tough questions about how can we align, how can we get the support again of civil society and make them see that actually these things are important for democracy. We need to talk about gender equality. We need to talk about workers' rights. We can't ignore that and put that aside.
Isaac, this must all be quite familiar to you as a pan-Latin American activist.
Yes, what we are seeing in Brazil is a new modality of coup d'etat. Because before we used to have military coup, like Pinochet. But now, now the United States is not pushing for a military action. So the way in which they change left-winger or left-center governments is through a parliamentary coups. So we have first Honduras, then we have Paraguay, now is Brazil. Perhaps the next one is going to be Ecuador or Venezuela, or Nicaragua, we don't know. But that's the idea, no? That now they use the parliament, and the parliament impeach the president, no? And they say that Dilma was corrupt, but 60% of this parliament has a strong accusation of corruption. And perhaps the most corrupt party in the whole Latin America is the PMDB, which is the new ruling party in Brazil. This is the party created during the dictatorship, the military dictatorship. The military dictatorship only allowed two parties, Arena and the MDB. So then the MDB became the party that ruled almost that was in every single government after the military. In every single government, without perhaps very small exception, they were part of the governments. And I think that the mistake that the Workers' Party made was to accept the PMDB as one of its partners. And now the PMDB is like the crows, the ravens. They eat the eyes of Dilma and Lula, no? Because this party always were a conservative organization that tried to stop every single reform. And the last point that I wanted to make is about one characteristic that I have Brazil. You mentioned about ethnic minorities. Brazil have an ethnic majority, which are the black people or the people from African roots. Most of the 200 million Brazilians have African roots. Brazil was the last slavery country in the world. 130 years ago, Brazil has slavery. 70 years after that Britain abolished slavery, Brazil have slaves. And now we don't have any single cabinet minister that have black African roots. You know, Brazil never abolished slavery like the United States through a civil war. No, they never have a revolution. They never have a war. Brazil was born as an empire, as a European empire, and they never have any revolution. So it is the same society from colonial times that has not changed too much. And the PT didn't change too much the society, and they tried to rule with the PMDB, and at the end the PMDB said,
ate them.
Yes. So now the problem is that the PMDB and the right wing is going to say, the PT was too moderate. Now we wanted to do very strong attacks on the working class people, the indigenous people, the African people. So we are going to see a very difficult situation, not only in Brazil, but the entire Latin America situation is going to change dramatically. Because now the new objective is to try to remove the governments in Venezuela, in Ecuador, in Bolivia, and to have, like in Argentina, a government like Macri, or like in Peru, like Kuczynski, right-wing governments. That's what they wanted to do now.
Indeed, it's a bleak prospect. Can I ask you very briefly to comment on to what extent the United States was involved in this coup?
I think that my previous speakers explained that. It was completely involved. Even the fact that the United States has not made any protest shows that they are supporting the coup. And it's the same tactic that they use in Paraguay, they use in Honduras, and they would like to use in Venezuela. No? They are completely involved because they want that Brazil become part of the U.S. influence. Something very interesting is that Brazil used to be the main partner of the USA in Latin America. But in the last decade, it changed. Now they want that Brazil become another time the main tool in Latin America.
Much more of this after the break. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing Brazil, 200 million strong, a population, I think, the fifth largest on the earth, and an awful lot of Arabs in Brazil. Maybe we'll talk about them later. The leader of the coup against President Dilma is, of course, of Lebanese descent. Just saying. Anyway, we took the Kalima Horra camera onto the streets of London to ask further whether this was part of Obama's legacy, this coup, and the changes that are happening in Latin America. Here's what they said.
Is Rousseff's removal part of Obama's legacy?
I don't believe so.
I think it was. I think it was as well.
What are the long implications for Brazil?
I think we're going to go into a recession, a big recession that will take time for us to recover again. For the economy, 5 years ago we were really, hiding high, and now it seems to be collapsed. We're like 47, 48.
I think it's a good thing that this has happened.
Now the new president, Michel Temer, can analyze the situation, can analyze our tax, can analyze everything, and make a proposal to us.
Well, he's got one big supporter on the streets of London, that's for sure. Let's carry on with the discussion. Yes, sir.
I'm Eibar Galindez from Mosoicol Social Movement, Colombian Social Movement. And I think that Brazil have two problems, big problems. One then is called politicians, and another is economical. But they have a big root. They have called corruption, but the corruption have a big root. External root is moral. People don't have moral. And internal root is education. People don't have properly education, and maybe some millions work with the old system of the education. It is come from 19th century. We are now work with this education. In the whole world, we work with the 19th century education. The people is more ignorant, more easy to manipulate, more easy to work with them or to bring when the politicians want. And why not introduce the new technologies and the new science inventions to the new educations? Why not use the neuro-linguistic programmation? Why not use, not pay attention to the talents, not to the numbers, not to the abilities of the children?
Well, look, with all respect to you and to Colombia, Brazil is one of the greatest economies in the world. It's in recession now. It was in recession last year, and it will be in a big recession next year, but it will come back. I'm not sure the Brazilians need lecturing from me or, frankly, from you on how to educate their people or how to strengthen their morals. So I'm going to pass the microphone, please, to the lady behind you. Yes, madam.
My name is Marcia Mar. I'm a multimedia artist, and I was a political activist in Brazil in the mid-80s when we were calling for direct elections now, direta já. And it's strange that we're coming about to be in the same position now. Of course, what has happened in Brazil, as the gentleman has mentioned earlier, is a parallel process what's happening in Latin America, and also is connected with the fact that suspenders believe, but capitalism has collapsed and we do not have an alternative. So this is like a comeback, and we have fascism growing in Europe, we have all the things that are happening in the world that are a response to this vacuum in culture. And in the turn of the century, we have this amazing possibility of potential change. I'm going to say that I believe the crisis in Brazil may rise to the point in which we will question democracy as it stands, and we will take to the next level, which I hope will be real democracy. And the issues that we discussed earlier about inclusivity of issues of race, gender, and the representation of our peoples in Brazil, which is a very, very important issue for Brazilians, will come to the fore. Because also in that cultural diversity we have in Brazil, we represent the entire journey of humans in the world. We are a mixture of everybody in Brazil. I am physically, genetically, epigenetically, that multiverse that we all are inhabiting in Brazil. The crises we have faced are not a crisis that we face alone. It's a crisis that the world is facing. And I hope that Brazil will find a piece of that solution. What is fun is that I have encountered in London people from all over the world that have said, why don't you guys, discussing neo-colonialism and colonialism history and so forth, says, why don't you Brazilians religious the world? Why don't you make an attempt to make us all dance and eat your food, and syncretism and religious syncretism, make us play football like you? And it says, we don't want to colonize anyone. It says, that's why we want you to come around. It says, but that is the beauty of Brazilians. We are a mixture of everybody in the world. We recognize ourselves as the face of everybody else in the world. And there's a beauty inherited to that. The crisis we're going through is basically because when the dragon is dying, as capitalism is, in the context of Brazil, is like a comeback of the right wing, believes that actually is going to sort things out. Even some people are claiming that they think dictatorship was better because they were the one tortures or taken by Condor kidnapping and killing of people. So they were not even aware of what was going on. But that is just a symptom. When people do not know how to go forward, they sometimes wish to go backwards. But I believe Brazil is going to go forward because people are not going to leave the streets until we have real democratic elections again.
Well, that was so good, I wish I'd said that myself. Would you kindly pass to the lady in red? Thank you.
Sorry, I speak in Portuguese. It's more easy for me. Ok. Primeiro pressionaram a Dilma sair do poder, né, para causar o impeachment. Houve uma super pressão. Agora tá havendo uma certa insatisfação com Michel Temer, não? Ok. E o povo? Como fica o povo nessa situação, sabe? Eu fico pensando assim no resultado de todos esses conflitos para o brasileiro, porque o brasileiro é um povo especial, o brasileiro é um povo trabalhador, é um povo que se esforça, que não depende tanto do governo para caminhar, né? É uma política bem diferente daqui. Então, eu acho que nós brasileiros, neste momento, temos que pensar de uma maneira mais positiva, sabe? Eu sei que a discussão continua, ela é válida, a crítica é necessária, mas a gente tem que pensar para o outro lado, né? Para aqueles que estão precisando de trabalho, porque muitas fábricas fecharam, né? Então, muitas fábricas... um pouco da credibilidade do Brasil caiu com as companhias internacionais, mas nós cremos que o Brasil vai voltar e ele vai conseguir se organizar novamente e novas companhias vão se abrir e o brasileiro vai realmente aprender a lidar e desenvolver uma maturidade em relação a essa situação.
Madam.
Hello, my name is Luz Duque. I am a specialist in political science and I am life coaching as well with a neurolinguistic program. So, my analysis as a Colombian woman, as I am, as a Latin American woman, is that this is one strategy. A strategy of the United States. Why? Because, you know, you remember what is happening in the Turkey, in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Syria. This is happening because there's one strategy of the United States staged in the area to control this area because they lost the control. Okay, this is the same example. This is happening in Latin America right now. You know, because for example, Bolivia, Ecuador, Argentina, Cristina, Evo Morales, the new president in Ecuador as well, Rafael Correa. You know, these people, Venezuela, these people, with union with Brazil, they would make a strong force of the left hands of the party. So, what happened when Brazil, who is the most bigger country in Latin America, lost this power, and the right, the party of the right, start to make the power. So what happened? All Latin America become more weak in this area. So this will happen. Why? Because Brazil is part of the most important countries, the ones of the emergent economies in the world. Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And China, right now, is the amazing, powerful country. Right now, all the inverses of the money are in United States. So right now, United States have to pay a lot of money to China. The dollar is down. The only strategy that United States have right now to grow up the dollar is to get control of the Latin America again. So they are not really happy with the situation right now in Latin America. The things they are doing, yes, the strategy is like Isaac Vigio said. You know, they use the parliament to take the control of the government, and they say, oh, it's legitimate, you know, but it's not legitimate at all. Because even if Dilma have some corrupt things that, in the fact, there are any proof that she did what the thing accused to her, all the governments have this kind of problem of the corruption. So it's just excuse.
As we say, it's the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah. So right now, if Brazil lost the power of the left hands, all the balance that they have between Latin America, because Brazil was the leader of the last camps of this South America. So the dollar, who is the most important right now, the dollar, the money of the dollar, come up, because this is the most important for the United States. So this has happened, and unfortunately, if Latin America not wake up and make some, I don't want to say revolution, but I think the Brazilian people should go out to the street and say, okay, we need the things change, or we want that left keep in the government, in the control, because this is the thing that will keep go up Brazilian.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Dr. James, you wanted to mention the Chinese angle.
I'd like to follow that, James Thring, Ministry of Peace, from an international peace perspective. We've looked to Brazil to vote on the Security Council against the wars that America has started, mostly in the Middle East. And it looks as though that is drifting away now. So I'm glad to hear what previous speaker has been saying. It sounds more optimistic. And I think with since Brazil is one of the non-aligned countries, and that force of non-aligned countries is still very much needed in the global political workplace, if you like, in order to stop the oligarchs, and America in particular, and its ally in the Middle East, Israel, from attacking poorer countries that they want to suppress and take over. We need Brazil to be part of that force, and I think, I don't know, but what do you think about it? This is a question really, but my vote is on the Chinese bringing the world together in a fairly communistic way, not in an oligarch way. They've got the money, but they're not using it in an aggressive or accumulative way. They're spending money to help I think, the poor people with infrastructure, water networks, power networks and so on. It may be counterproductive in some ways, because one day they might pull the plug, but I don't think they will do that sort of thing because of their general moral approach to the world. It's about helping people. It's about people all being involved in government and the benefit, the economic benefits and rise of a country. That's the way they're running their country, as I see it, and that's a good thing for the world. And it's the only force, the only country that's powerful enough to stand up to the 0.001% of the world. In other words, the 50 people in the who are not actually in the Forbes list, who have more money than even the Forbes list people.
Well, look,
who are running the world.
We don't want to have any more behemoths, hyperpowers. We don't want it to be the United States, and neither do we want it to be China. We want a multipolar world, which was, for me, the real importance of Brazil. I've never been to Brazil. I doubt I ever will be. I don't know any Brazilians until tonight. But I admired and respected Brazil because it was becoming powerful. And I want as many different countries in the world to be powerful, to be prosperous and powerful and democratic and progressive, because that's the best equilibrium we can have in the world. I, like you, I admire China, of course, and if I was going to be ruled by anyone, I'd rather it was China than George W. Bush, but I don't want to be ruled by anyone, in truth. I want us all to rule ourselves and have a balanced world. Well, I need to take another break. Be right back. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, for Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London, discussing Brazil. Let's take the gentleman in the second row. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. En principio yo soy ecuatoriano y se está viviendo un proceso muy largo en Latinoamérica de muchos cambios muy buenos. Un cambio de época, se dice. Pero antes de ello había un plan, el plan que se llamaba el Plan Cóndor. El Plan Cóndor nació en la década de los 70, el cual era comenzar a eliminar a los presidentes, a las dictaduras, se las ponía por los regímenes establecidos por los pueblos. En el caso de Allende, en el caso inclusive de Ecuador, se los asesinaba prácticamente la CIA. Ese fue el Plan Cóndor inicial. Hoy se establece un nuevo Plan Cóndor, que es de una especie de golpes blandos. Los golpes blandos vienen a ser constitucionales, parlamentarios y bien regidos, e inclusive bien legislados, supuestamente. Y entonces esto hace que cambien inclusive los presidentes, como es en Brasil. También en Ecuador se está iniciándose algún proceso de ese tipo. En Venezuela es igual. El golpe es diferente, el golpe ya no es militar, el golpe ya viene a ser político. Y esto está haciendo que todo se esté resquebrajando, tanto en porque se ha constituido unos grandes bloques económicos, unos bloques también sociales, como el ALBA, como el UNASUR, como el Banco del Sur. Todo eso se está desquebrajando porque no es bueno, creo, para los que no quieren vernos unidos. Yo creo que Latinoamérica es una sola, América es una sola. No existe nada más fuerte que todos tenemos que ser unidos, los hispanohablantes y los latinoamericanos.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. The lady with the wonderful flag.
Assalamu alaikum. Today is World Peace Day. Let's remember that all of us all over the world are hoping for that and are able to bring pieces of that wonderful jigsaw puzzle together. Going back to the question of China, they have wonderful food. They have already colonized us one way, and they do not wish to colonize us in another way, because as you've said yourself and all of us, we have come to a point where we have interconnectivity in the world. We have the ability for the first time as each individual to connect with one another like cells in the body. They are able to say, hey, let's talk, liver, kidney, where are you? And for the first time, we're able to establish real democracy. In simple terms, half of the budget of the world goes into war, into our acrimonious relationships, into fear, into things that actually are not fostering a way in which we can have free healthcare for all in the world, peace, and the pharmaceutical industry belonging to the people, so then we can finally understand epigenetically how to survive ourselves and forgive ourselves for the past is something we have lived and is in the past. So there are amazing changes that are taking place at the moment. I myself speak simultaneously to anyone in any language in the world, anyone who speaks in any language. And those changes of consciousness are taking place. And Latin America, we talk about magical realism, in fact is magical in many ways. And so is every place in the world. And we want to have the connectivity as Brazilians. We want to be at peace and have democracy among ourselves, to be able to cherish, envisage together the democracy of the world that we all are invested on it. So these distractions that we have at the moment about the dragon dying of capitalism and the alternative having to rise are just distractions, because the past has been quite horrendous. We forgive our ancestors and ourselves for not having done better, but now we have an amazing possibility of changing our emotions, our way of being together, and our interconnectivity with everybody in the world. And thank you for this.
Thank you. Dr. Kalina?
Before that, could I just show one picture of our president who has just been impeached?
Please do, yeah. And deal briefly for the Arab audience with what role the Arab Brazilians have played in all this.
This is Dilma Rousseff in the early 70s being questioned by the dictators at the time. You can see that they're covering their faces because they don't want it to be in the pictures. And this is the president now. The difference is that now she's older, and the people who are questioning her are not ashamed of their rules, although they should be. So I quite like the picture. It's recent, and this is from
Well, it's very interesting. Well, Carolina first, then.
Okay.
And then you finally.
On their points about the consciousness that is building amongst Brazilians. If going back to what I said before, where do we go from here? if we are at the moment upset with what's happened and see that our democracy has been threatened and we're talking about a possibility of authoritarianism, if we look at the positive aspect, this can be an opportunity, developing further from other people, an opportunity for us to, please, can I talk?
I'm just saying this is the change of questions. I can say whatever you say at the same time you speak.
Now you're getting psychedelic.
No, I don't think we should interrupt anyone who is speaking. I don't
Go
think
ahead,
that's
Doctor,
very, yeah.
go ahead.
So
You have the
basically,
floor.
this can also be an opportunity for us to strengthen our democracy, and this is what we need to do at the moment. And this is why there's actually a debate, going back to the direct elections, if we should be pressuring for direct elections, or if we should pressure for Dilma's return, because after all, this is about respecting democracy, the fact that she was voted. So there is that debate as well. Would direct elections necessarily mean democracy? Wouldn't that be a recognition of this process? We agree with it, and we're, so we are in a complex situation. And I believe that this basically is a step down from what we have been, the advancements that we've come in the last years, but we have to see that there is a bit of change in mindset already happening here and there. People already, they talk about the resentful towards the impeachment, who disagree with what they did, etc. So there's an opportunity maybe in the next months for things to reverse and to get better. So I think this is where we, as experts, journalists, and activists, we need to think of how we can build our democracy from the scrambles of at the present moment.
If you want my advice, I'd run Lula rather than Dilma. Final word, I think, to you, sir. Round up the discussion and deal with this Arab issue, if you would.
Absolutely. We always hear that the US are a melting pot. Well, that's because you haven't been to Brazil. Brazil are the real melting pots of the world. We have the largest Italian, the largest German population in the world. We have the indigenous. The city where I come from, Salvador, has the largest black community in the world outside Africa. We have the largest Japanese community, and we have a large Arabic community. President Dilma, the legitimate President Dilma himself is of Syrian-Lebanese background. That's from when the Turks, the Ottoman Empire, were very oppressive. They were fleeing. We mistakenly call them all Turks. Obviously, it's wrong, but because they were fleeing the Turks, we call them Turks. We have street food in Brazil is kibe, is fija. We have a lot of influence from Arab culture, as with so many other cultures. But the difference is these people went to Brazil a long time ago, and they start mixing a long time ago. So they don't have a strong sense of identity. The Arab people, the Arab community does in Brazil is so diluted that it does not have a strong sense of identity. When it comes to international policy, Lula was very well aligned with the Iranian government. As a matter of fact, there was one point under Ahmadinejad where Turkey and Brazil were the only brokers, the only countries that Iran could communicate with in the world. So Brazil established very positive relations with Palestine, with Lebanon, with Iran under Lula. With Dilma, that changed a little bit, particularly with Iran, her being a woman, that made a difference to the Iranian government. But still, Brazil was very closely aligned to Palestine. That is beginning to change, which is a huge contradiction in itself, Dilma being of Syrian-Lebanese background himself.
But he's going to tilt towards a more pro-American, pro-Israeli
pro-American,
policy.
Absolutely.
Now, how's that for an irony?
Yeah, that's Simone de Beauvoir used to say the oppressors wouldn't be so successful if they didn't have supporters amongst the oppressed. So Brazil is a portrait of that. We have black, Japanese, we have all sorts, and we have women, we have black people supporting the coup. This thing called meritocracy they invented in Brazil. They say this is to justify the inequalities. They say if there's no black people there and no women there, that's because they're no good and they don't deserve to be there. So work hard. That's the motto of the new government. Work. And I think we should work. But I also remember that Arbeit macht frei is what's said at the entrance of the Auschwitz concentration camp. And it's not just through work that we're going to go forward for giving up our rights, giving up our human rights like China does. So we have to be very careful with being positive. I think we should be positive. I think we should fight, but it's not by shutting our eyes and working 80 hours a week in dying before we retire.
Bravo. I just want to ask you finally, what is the likely perspective here? Not what we would hope for. Well, let me put a perspective to you. That they criminalize Lula and that he cannot stand in the elections. Dilma has been impeached. Does the Workers' Party have any chance in those circumstances of coming back to power? And what is your evaluation, Dr. Carolina was the first to raise it, of the possibility of the clashes on the street becoming more serious, of armed struggle breaking out and a military reaction to that? On a scale of 1 to 10, what are the dangers of that?
Okay, I'm going to be a bit cynical and a bit pessimistic. It looks very bad right now. I couldn't emphasize how urgent and how critical the situation in Brazil is right now. And going out in the streets is incredibly double-edged. On one hand, we need to do that. We can't just stand and let nothing happen. On the other hand, that could be a lame excuse for military intervention and having the military in the power again. So too much commotion, too much social convulsion could have very, very, very bad consequences. And unfortunately, the prospects are very negative right now. I believe if we can turn this around. I believe we can get Lula there in 2018 or a bona fide president. But there's going to be a lot of convulsion, and again, the social conversion can have very negative consequences because it can serve as a lame excuse for a far more reactionary government and possibly even military intervention.
What a colorful and wonderfully Brazilian flavored description of the rich and powerful who have seized control in a coup in Brazil. The question is, will it succeed? The question is, will all these progressive governments that were hailed everywhere across the world as part of 21st century progressive politics fall one after the other? Will the frothing beasts come to power in Venezuela? Will the frothing beasts consolidate their power in other Latin American countries? They have no program. They have no solution to the problems of even their own countries, the metropolitan capitalist countries. Their program, their ideas cannot solve even the problems of the metropolitan countries. When it comes to emerging continents and countries like Latin America, it's unlikely that they're going to find their mojo there. And thus, the frothing beast frothes more and becomes even more bestial. It's a very, very dramatic picture. Everything turns on the events in Brazil over the next 18 months or so. Rosa Luxemburg said it was a choice between socialism and barbarism. It would appear that that choice is coming quickly onto the front of the agenda in Brazil. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen Television, coming to you from London. And thank you for watching.